All right. How are we doing? Pretty good. Glad to see you. Guys, we only have 2 weeks left. So here's what's going on. We have 2 weeks left. And today, I want to try and finish up. Ethics, everything you need to know about ethics. Next week, I want to dedicate all of next week to political philosophy, thinking about how we should organize society as a whole, what the role of government is, what's the relationship between politics and ethics. Spend Monday and Wednesday on those topics. And then the following week, which is the final week, we spend a little time on this big topic called existentialism, think a little deeper about what the meaning of life is and how we would ever figure that out. And then finally, the last day of class, I'm just going to share with you a PowerPoint slide that kind of shows you what my research has been since I've been a student. So you've known me as a teacher, but then I'll share with you a little bit what being a researcher is like. Sound good? All right, guys, so let's get started. So your fourth and final assignment is up on Blackboard. I'm going to go through it like I've gone through all the other ones. And it's due on the 18th, November 18th, exactly 2 weeks from now, 14 days. So the fourth assignment is exploring the meaning of life. Again, 3 to 4 pages, double spaced, Microsoft Word, so I can put in comments. Due on November 18th, send it to my email address right there, 25% of your total grade. 5 questions as usual, each worth 5%. Here are the 5 questions. What is the meaning of life according to you? Guys, I don't know the answer to this, obviously, and I don't even know what it means. So I'm leaving it up to you to figure out what that even means, what it means to you, and then answer it. What does it mean to you, that question, and what is the answer to it? What is the meaning of life to you, you know? What is it? I have no idea. I don't know. All I know is that existentialism provides a framework for approaching that kind of problem, right? We've seen people like Nietzsche who say it doesn't really matter too much whether you live a good life or a bad life. The best life will always be the one that's has the most vitality and the most spontaneity. If you can, whatever you do, if you can do it very intensely, very passionately, very robustly, then don't get caught up in right and wrong, good and evil. Hey, Dante, live a life that's just passionate and full of energy and power, and that's about it. Other people will say, no, you got to have God in there. You can't really live a full life without God because, you know, it's an integral part of being a human being to have a relationship with God. So some people will say the meaning of life is to discover the proper relationship with God. Right? So many Christians will say that, Pascal, Kierkegaard. And then other people will say, no. There is no meaning to life. So it's up to you to make it up. So, and for those people, your identity is itself a work of art. You see that? You create your identity because there isn't one assigned to you by God or before you exist. So your very existence gives you your essence, and it's up to you to determine what that essence is. So your identity is what determines what your meaning of life will be. Do you see that? As you create your own identity, you'll also be creating your own meaning of life. And you know, these are the broad brush strokes that we'll be going through the last week, but this is what you should be thinking about for your papers, is that when you think about what is the meaning of life according to you, you can borrow from all of that, or you can come up with something totally your own. It's fine, but as long as you answer the question, you'll be fine. Question number 2, is it reason or faith or beauty or goodness or something else that makes life meaningful and worth living to you? So here I'm making it more precise. I'm giving you some suggestions to work with. If you live a beautiful life, kind of like we saw with American Beauty, right? If you live a life where you can look back on it, and no matter how sloppy or mediocre or worthless you think you were, if you can look back on a few memories that redeem the whole thing, is that good enough? Do you think the existence of God, or at least belief in him, is necessary to live a meaningful life. Why or why not? It's a very important topic. Some people think that religion is what has taken us this far in terms of allowing us to survive as a species, because it's given us a reason to live, because it's made life meaningful in terms of something like a God who gives us a purpose. Number 4, do you think that your passions, choices, and commitments define your identity and who you are? Why or why not? So some people say, hey, if you just dodge responsibility your whole life and just try to be a hedonist and stimulate yourself and indulge every pleasure, you will not only get bored very quickly, but you will begin to despair. Psychologically, that'll begin to weigh on you. So the only way to really, truly live a fulfilled life is to go for things that you're truly, truly passionate about. Things that involve actual meaningful choices and meaningful commitments. Institutions like marriage and friendship and careers, that's how you get meaning in life. Or maybe not. Maybe that's wrong. But I want you to think about that. Do you think you need those kinds of very meaningful aspects of life, like passions, choices, and commitments, in order to have an identity and live a meaningful life? And then finally, number 5, what is the relationship between your identity and the meaning and value of life? Does one influence the other? Can one have one without the other? Why or why not? So here, if you don't have a keen sense of who you are, can you still live a meaningful life even though you have a very vague sense of who you are? And then vice versa, can you have a very solid identity without having a sense of what the meaning of life is? Or do those things always go together? And then just tell me why or why not you believe what you believe. That will be the end of the course. Any questions? Anything I need to clarify? I'm really looking forward to this one more than any of the other ones. I'm going to get to know you individually. The religious ones, the pseudo-religious ones, the atheists. All right, guys, we have a lot to cover, so let's get going. So my goal today really is to try and tie up the loose ends of this whole ethical stuff. And it's very related to what's coming next. Because some people might say, either by living a religious life or by living a very ethical life, that itself will give you meaning in life, you know? So this topic goes nicely into the next one, because both of them are axiological. They're about values, right? Ethics is about good and bad actions and good and bad persons. And axiology is about good and bad lives. So there's a lot of overlap there. All right. Good. So just a couple of general remarks. I'm going to make some general remarks to tie up some loose ends, and then we're going to go step by step through consequentialism, some of the objections, why some people say it doesn't work. Then we're going to go through deontology quickly, some things people say that might object to why that doesn't work, and then finally virtue ethics. And then that's going to be, all we're going to do today. Sound good? All right, let's go. So, general remarks. Okay, general remarks. One of the most ethical activities you can think of, or at least I can think of, I want to know what you think, is leadership. Leadership is an extremely ethical activity. And in fact, I think ideally we would love for our universities, our churches, our militaries to produce nothing but leaders. Now, we can find leadership in probably every institution. We can find leadership, obviously, in our government. We can find it in our churches. We can find it in our businesses, in our nonprofits. We can find them almost everywhere. The reason I'm bringing this up, and it's just a quick point, is that many of our best leaders go unrecognized. That's all I'm trying to say. And in particular, guys, what I have in mind is women. Women go unrecognized, unfortunately, and they offer some of the best leadership that we have in society. What I'm trying to get at is when you read history, when you read history books, when you see documentaries about history, it seems to be all led by men. And the writers of these histories are primarily men. And if you take their models of leadership, it will appear one-sided, as if leadership is all about competition and military activity, or even if it's within the context of the church, it'll be like being a pope or an archbishop, something like that. But I just want to correct that by saying that raising a family and running a household, which in most cultures have been done by women, I think that has been an under-recognized type of leadership. I think that we have many, many matriarchs in society. We have many, many wonderful leaders who are mothers, who are grandmothers, who are great-grandmothers. And I just have to point out that so much of the ethical activity that goes on is not celebrated and not highlighted in our books. But I have to stress that just because it's not celebrated and it's not the kind of thing that gets attention in history books doesn't mean it isn't going on all the time, and doesn't mean that it's not actually the foundation for the rest of society. You see what I'm saying? Leadership is not always about being commander-in-chief and that kind of thing. The ability to stabilize a home, to raise children, grooming, manners, personal hygiene, cooperation, chores, understanding hospitality, all of these things, this is what keeps society together. And women lead in this respect, not just as an accident, but their intuitions and their instincts are often sharper and more direct than a lot of men. So I just have to give credit where credit is due to correct for the absence we'll find of books dedicated to leadership by women. Now, one thing that has been emerging slowly, and I'm going to emphasize again, is another topic, which is ethics is all about judgment, right? We're determining what actions are right and wrong, determining how you figure out whether a person is good and bad. But I want to shift your attention a bit away from that definition to a much larger thing that ethics is about. So yes, ethics is all about the judgments in one respect, figuring out in the details exactly what's right or wrong, and exactly when something crosses the line from being permissible to being prohibited, or even becoming mandatory. That is ethics. But there's a broader thing that ethics is about. It's actually about living a good life, living a flourishing life. So given everything that we are, you take everything that we are, and you take all that potential for pleasure and happiness, potential for perfection or excellence, you take all of that and you create an environment in which you maximize it. That's very different from judging particular actions. That's not saying, look, let's focus on what the person is rather than all his actions. And if you start with the right nurturing of the person, the right actions will take care of themselves. You see, it's a different understanding. I got to point that out because we're going to go through consequentialism quickly, then deontology. One argument to say that virtue ethics is better than the other two is that it starts with our full capacities, our full potential, and then tries to work backwards from, if we're going to reach our full potential, then what do we need to be doing now? What habits do we need to have in order to achieve that goal? So consequentialism and deontology are more judgmental, whereas virtue ethics is much more oriented towards this unachieved potential that we have. Okay. So remember I've talked a little bit about how ethics, especially from the Stoic and Zen Buddhist perspective, is about one way to think about it is it's avoiding the pathetic, right? Avoiding being pathetic. Pathetic here doesn't just mean pitiful, It means being all in your feelings and acting from your feelings. So a true Stoic, which many people equate with masculinity, right? A kind of masculine frame and a masculine character would be one that feels, but doesn't act from the feeling. Instead, you act from your solid character that you've sculpted over time. Okay? Now, one thing I want to point out is that many people would say that at the very height of ethical activity, when you're acting from your solid, mature character, the real kind of pleasure that's the ideal in that sense is not a kind of bliss, because bliss would be overwhelming and very in your feelings. Instead, there's another word, another kind of pleasure that's the ideal for the Stoic and the Zen Buddhist. And this is cheerfulness. If you really think about the word cheerfulness, if you look at the context in which people talk about being of good cheer or being cheerful, it's always against a backdrop of something dark and something rather challenging. You know what I mean? When someone says be cheerful or be of good cheer, they're typically trying to cheer you up because you are sad or you have a lot to be depressed about. Maybe you're going through a rough time, loss of a loved one, that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to propose to you is that the ideal of the ethical life from a feeling standpoint, especially within a Stoic or Zen Buddhist frame, is not an overwhelming bliss. It's much more of a, you'll still feel, but you'll feel a kind of cheerfulness, or another name for it might be lightheartedness, right? The world weighs you down with cares and burdens, and the best you can do is not to be too serious as you go through life. Be of good cheer, be lighthearted, don't take things too seriously. And that itself already, if you're able to do that, you're already practicing a tremendous amount of agency, and you're changing not only yourself, but your environment around you. Because I don't know if you have this experience, but gloomy people, one gloomy person in a group can bring the whole thing down. You know what I mean? I don't know if you have that experience with gloominess. So a big part of good manners is either not to go to the party, or if you're gonna go, be fake and put on a mask of good cheer. You kind of see what I'm saying? Gloominess has this weird, I don't know, it's like kind of like say one apple spoils the whole bunch. That's the kind of thing. So it's really a very ethical thing to try to be very cheerful. Good reasons versus good taste. Guys, we're in philosophy, and we're trying to figure out how we figure out whether something is good or bad, an action is good or bad. And so far, we've taken this rational approach to things. Like, oh, we got to figure out some reasons to choose one action over another. Or we got to choose some reasons why one action is good and another is bad. But I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you some of the greatest thinkers actually don't think that ethical activity and ethical judgments is really about reasons at all. Just like if someone knows how to dress well, we say he has good taste. Well, that's aesthetic, right? Some people believe the exact same thing is what's really going on in ethics too. In other words, what you're refining when you make ethical judgments is not so much your reasons as your taste. You know what I mean? Some actions are just in bad taste, poor taste, and other actions are in really, really good taste. And the important thing of putting things that way is that it makes it sound either identical to or parallel to aesthetics, right? When someone has good taste in clothes, or they dress well, that is purely aesthetic. And all I want to suggest to you is that if you listen to someone's reasons for why polygamy is wrong, or why capital punishment is wrong, or why abortion is wrong, always be mindful that, yes, they may have developed some good reasons, but as human beings, given our humanity, we're probably just repelled by certain things, you know what I mean? And attracted to others. And if we're really, really honest, our reasons aren't the real power doing the judgment. It's our sense of taste. Sometimes it's less refined, sometimes it's more, but just our sentiments, our feelings, and our ability to discriminate the qualities of different things and the qualitative differences between things. Some philosophers argue, if you're really honest, your humanity, the part of your humanity that's at work, when you say something's absolutely unacceptable, abominable, horrible, it's not really reasons. It's not reason that's active at that moment. It's your feelings, it's your sentiments. And you are identifying qualities that you find repulsive or in bad taste. You see what I'm saying? All right. I'm going fast because I want us to get through a lot of stuff. Once again, here we're going to integrate art and science, or art and the science of ethics. There was a philosopher, I shared with him with you before, Nietzsche. He said basically that one of the things that happens when we witness good art, like a good tragedy, is that we are refining our love of life through art. What is art doing? It's holding up a mirror to life, but in that mirror to life, the image we see in the mirror is aestheticized, it's made beautiful. Now, there are two ways you can make life beautiful, and I talked about this during the first week of class. There was another philosopher called Schopenhauer, remember? Schopenhauer said, if you zoom in on your life and you go episode by episode, day by day, it looks a lot like a comedy. But if you look at the overall arc of your life, it looks like a tragedy. And that's what Nietzsche was building on, because he said, look, what's actually happening in art is a very ethical activity. It might not seem like it, but it's wonderful. What is happening in art? Well, let's take tragedy and comedy. What is comedy doing, like a sitcom or a stand-up comic? He's taking the moments in life that we live on a day-to-day basis, and he's finding what's ridiculous about it, and he's getting us to have a sense of humor about it, and we come away, according to Nietzsche, loving life more because it's more amusing. And even though those ridiculous moments might be embarrassing in some contexts, in the context of art, we become well disposed toward it. We actually celebrate life. We're like, yeah, life is kind of comic. And the comic side of life makes life worth living. You see that? That's an artistic activity, it's an aesthetic activity. But it's also educating us, it's training us, it's affecting us and influencing us and making us love life. And the same is true with tragedy. Now, the effect that makes us love life, the aesthetic effect that makes us love life in comedy, that's the ridiculousness of it. But in tragedy, there's another aesthetic quality that makes us love life too. And that's called sublimity, the sublime. Have you heard this word sublime? Sublimity is like night versus day. Day is very beautiful. It's got all of this brilliance and, it's got all these particular objects in front of you, many of them. Whereas night, many philosophers say, is sublime. Why is night sublime? Well, there's pleasure in it, but it's a very simple thing compared to day, and also it's very mysterious. So that uncertainty in night, as well as the fact that it is, for lack of a better word, it is slightly terrifying. The sublime always has slight terror in it. So God is going to be a very sublime idea. You know what I mean? In terms of the rank of ideas in our minds, God would be more on the sublime side. And then I guess an insect wandering around will be more common. So what does a dramatist do? He takes those two sides of life and he presents them to us. And both the comic and the tragic are different versions of the beautiful, different ways of being beautiful. And so what they're doing is they're educating us to love life and see it as beautiful. And so, of course, this is related to existentialism too. And what Nietzsche built from this is that if you develop a love for comedy and a love for tragedy, then a third thing will happen that is purely ethical. You will develop a love for fate. No matter what fate brings your way, you're not going to be able to control it all the time, but over time you can develop the habit of, you know what? life is worth living regardless of which way fate goes. And that is an ethical activity. It's not just aesthetic at that point. So Nietzsche was a fatalist. He believed that we have a fate, we can't control it, but what we can control is like the Stoics, we can control our attitude towards it. And at the highest heights of ethical activity for Nietzsche is an affirmation of life, an affirmation of our fate. He called it amor fati, the love of fate. And that's the highest ethical activity for someone like Nietzsche. Finally, I want to share with you this word ethics, guys. If you study its history, it's a Greek word, and it's used to describe the character of something. So, in persuading someone in a speech, Aristotle divided up what the Greeks called the ethos, the pathos, and the logos. Those of you going to law school might find this interesting if you become a trial lawyer. What is the ethos, the pathos, and the logos? Well, look at our current ads. If you look at our advertisements, you'll see ethos, pathos, and logos. All right. So an ad for some medicine, right? How will they structure the ad? Well, they'll probably show someone suffering. Oh, my neck, it hurts. It hurts so bad at night, sleeping on my back. So now, when you have a speaker in an ad talking about how much it hurts and all the symptoms and all the pain and agony and the worries, that is creating pathos, right? Remember I told you pathos is all about feeling. So what are they showing you? They're showing you a suffering person, and they're getting you to identify with that person. Say, yeah, I have those same pains too, or it must be really painful to be like that person. So there's empathy, empathy, suffering. See that? So they structure the ad like that. They start off with the suffering. And then they say, oh, I am a scientist I'm a medical doctor at Harvard Medical School. I have 25 years of practice, and I've published over 100 papers, and I'm an established authority and expert in my field. That is called ethos. What are they doing there? They are appealing to your sense of respect for authority, expertise. You see what I'm saying? You know what ads I'm talking about, right? They structure things that way. So the ethos in that case is appealing to your sense of, man, this guy is impressive. I should trust what he has to say. You see that? They're working on you. They're persuading you using different parts of your soul. So the pathos is getting your feelings going. Then someone reassures you, like, don't worry. If you have this condition, there are some experts at Harvard or wherever. See all that credibility, appeal to authority and credibility. And then the last element is called the logos. And the logos is now the story they're going to tell that's going to sound scientific. So we've developed a medicine that has been tested in over 100 clinical trials, and it has produced results in 90%. 90% of the people who take this medicine recover, and there are only few side effects, and the scientific literature is vast on all the benefits of this medicine. That's now the logos. You see that? Ethos, pathos, and logos, if arranged properly, that's how advertising works largely. And so, the reason I'm bringing this up, that word ethos, when we talk about ethics in philosophy, we're using it in one particular way, right? We're talking about the study of the conditions under which human life flourishes, and we're also talking about how we can determine right and wrong. But there's this other sense of ethos. I've been doing my own research on this, and it's fascinating. The ancient Greeks actually believed that music had a tremendous ethical effect on people. It changed your character. It literally changed your character. So ethos for the Greeks at some point in their history was also used as a word to talk about the effect that music has on people's emotions, behavior, and feelings. So I'm just sharing all of that with you to let you know that this thing we call someone's character is very complex. And we have a lot to think about how you produce people with the best character. Maybe studying ethics from textbooks is less effective than playing harmonic music to young children so that they grow up with a deep sense of harmony and maybe gentleness. You kind of see what I'm saying? There are studies that maybe playing Mozart for children might have a much deeper effect on their character and things like that than very violent or chaotic music. You see what I'm saying? It's a hypothesis, but all I'm saying is it's rooted in the ancient Greeks' use of that word ethos. All right, now let's focus on these tying up the loose ends for consequentialism, deontology, and then virtue ethics. Okay, guys, let's go step by step. A bit of this is review. What is consequentialism? Consequentialism is actually an umbrella term. There are many different types of consequentialism. It's a family name. Consequentialism is that family name of that family of ethical theories that all say the way you figure out which action is right or wrong is by figuring out which action has the best consequences. So if an action is bad, if it doesn't maximize consequences, and an action is good if given all the people involved and all the actions that are alternatives, it's the one that maximizes the maximum happiness for everyone. And here, consequences can be used in different ways, guys. We talked about two big ethical theories, right? Ethical egoism and utilitarianism. Ethical egoism just basically says it is ethical to always do what is in your best interest, so that's centered on one person. And then utilitarianism says it is ethical to always do what is in the best interest of everyone involved. And the way they interpret that best interest is as happiness. Okay? I just want to throw out there is another type of consequentialism. We're not going to go into detail with it, but I remember the last time I was talking about consequentialism, I left you with a very deep question. I asked you this: is our fellow man's capacity for deep, deep misery and pain, as well as blissful happiness, is that the most honorable part of him? Is that the part that we should honor the most, that we should care about the most, or is there some other aspect? And the reason I brought that up, guys, is because there's another kind of utilitarianism. It's not really focused on maximizing happiness, but it's kind of focused on maximizing, you could call it perfection, or you could call it achievement, or you could call it virtue, but not virtue in the moral sense of virtue, but fitness. You know what I mean? Like, think about an athlete who practices 10 hours a day. He's becoming more and more and more fit, right? So again, what's more honorable about a person? Is it his capacity to suffer and feel pleasure? Is that the axis that's proper? Or is it mediocrity versus deep, deep perfection and excellence? Do you guys see where I'm going with that? Some people, a good coach might actually say, I don't care about how tired you are. I don't care about your pleasure. I see potential in you, and if you follow what I'm telling you, you will be a better athlete. You kind of see what I'm saying? When he's talking about better there, he's not talking about your pathetic feelings. He's not talking about your moods and all of that. He's talking about he knows what's best for you. If you take in a certain diet, and you train a certain number of hours, and you follow certain routines, you can see that your physique will improve qualitatively, and you will become more fit. Not in more virtuous, but not in the, not in the moral sense of virtue, but in the pure effectiveness and efficiency sense of virtue. So before we go on, I wanted to ask you, which one is more honorable in our fellow man? If we care about each other, should we care about making things as comfortable and convenient and cosmetic for each other as possible? Or should we, it's not so much that we want pain for its own sake, but regardless of pain or pleasure, should we be focused on, I'm going to do whatever it takes so that you are as skillful and as fit as possible. You have to pause there. This is a deep, deep question. There are certain governments in history that did not care about the happiness of their people, but they did care about fitness. You kind of see what I'm saying? They cared about the fitness so much that they even regulated who would marry who based on eugenics. You guys see where I'm going? They wanted to breed a superior race. They're not interested in this pathetic stuff about feelings. So I have to ask you, what do you think? We're going to political philosophy next week, but ethics is very related to that because you have to figure out how you feel about your fellow man. Is he like a piece of beautiful marble, and the right sculptor will turn out a beautiful sculpture, and so you don't care about the process of hurting the marble, you care about the final product, the beauty and the goodness and the virtue of the final product? Is that what matters? Or is it all about feeling and maximizing comfort, maximizing pleasure? What do you think? This is a very philosophical question that we need to get out of the way. Because if we did have one world government one day, and they tried to, pick the culture that would be best for everyone instead of being multicultural. So imagine a world with one world government and one world culture. I know that sounds horrible, but just go with me here. Which culture would be best? Would it be the culture which makes everyone as comfortable and maximizes convenience and just, you can go through life just effortlessly? Is that what you want to maximize? Or do you want to maximize something like adaptability and fitness and keenness, that kind of thing? I really need feedback from you on that. And this is tied to leadership. When you elect a leader in a democracy, are you electing someone to do what you want them to do? Are you electing someone who knows better? And so once they're in office, regardless of what you want them to do, they're supposed to do what's in your best interest. You see how that's, you have to think deeper about what leadership is in that case? One of the advantages of utilitarianism, in my opinion, is that because it's about pleasure, and because it has a quantitative aspect, maybe not, some people say it has a quantitative aspect. When a ruler or a president or whatever is trying to think about what is in everyone's best interest, he can use different models and see which one maximizes that interest, right? But that would be a happiness or utility or benefit-based model. What about a model where you're trying to maximize people's fitness? Something like Sparta, right? The Spartans were kind of like that achievement and perfection-oriented society that's filling the about. You know what I mean? Every young man is supposed to be this leader, this aggressive, completely like animalistic, almost ferocious warrior. And that was their ideal. Like, it's beyond even courage. Courage wouldn't be the proper word to describe that. It's about pure manliness and pure, I think the word would be valor. If you think about the word valor, what you're maximizing in that society is the complete willingness to sacrifice yourself for the community. Now you're going to fight to the death like they did in 300, and it doesn't matter if you lose your life. It doesn't even matter if you didn't win the war in that battle. Even if you advanced the position of your overall side a little bit, when you're a Spartan, you use all of your excellence and you use it for noble ends. And that's the thing, nobility, right? What is nobility? Is nobility about comfort and luxury and maximizing that kind of thing, very refined pleasures? Or is nobility really about sacrifice and magnanimity? Kind of like soldiers in the military kind of thing. What is most honorable about the human being? When you think about it, talking about values here. If the human being is valuable, what's most valuable about it? Is it the fact that we can really feel lots of pain, and so we want to honor that and prevent that and maximize pleasure? Or is it the fact that he can be a great academic, he can be a great Rhodes Scholar, he can be a great, that's greatness basically. That's whether or not that maximizes happiness is an independent issue. What do you guys feel about that? If you were a leader, what would you want to maximize in your people? Go ahead.
I'm not sure this is a good answer because, in my view, taking any extreme in following that almost religiously kind of leads to an emptiness in the other half. So if you lead by excellence, you lead by achievement, then I feel like the people will be emotionally very empty and hollow. We won't really be able to relate with one another or really care for the things that you do other than just accomplishing something for its own sake. And I think the other way too, you really, it's kind of like if you're in society, then people will probably live without much purpose, without much meaning in life, because they don't know why they're given. Like they don't have a desire to attain anything else because they know already they're used to that.
See, I like what you're saying. So two societies that come to mind are American society. I don't know if you know, but compared to other developed nations, we don't take a lot of time off during the year. Most Americans don't use all their holidays. So work ethic is big here. And another society that comes to mind is Japanese culture. Japanese culture is very work-oriented, to the point where people they work until they can't work anymore. Suicide rates are very high there. Suicide rates are also very high among students in Japan and Korea, because the pressure to be at the top is so much that underperforming is just a dishonor to the family. So they'd rather kill themselves out of a sense of shame than to continue living in a society where you're shamed for underperforming. So I can see how that's toxic. I'm disagreeing with you. But what about the pleasure side? I mean, maximizing pleasure. Even if it's high quality pleasures, right? Like, let's say most people spend all their leisure in museums and reading philosophy and having great conversation. It doesn't have to be vulgar, like taking heroin all day. What do you think, guys?
I think that would maybe accomplish things academically, but because the society would be led to just continue the fruits of enjoying things, none of that knowledge, none of that discovery would be applied for it to be meaningful.
When the average voter votes, what do you think he's expecting from the leader that they're putting in office? To maximize pleasure, to turn, or do you think do they think this leader is some kind of coach who's going to maximize fitness? I don't know. I'm very curious. What do you think is going on in the average voter's mind, especially in a democratic republic like ours with a liberal constitution? So literally, it's representative government. That person is your employee who's in that office. So now, what are we expecting from them? I'm assuming we voted for him or her because they were better than us in some way. It's something they can do better than we can. Maybe it's, dealing with the establishment politics and politicians. They're savvy, they know how to get things done. Maybe, I don't know, they spent some time in the military, and at this moment in history, we need a strong military leader as commander-in-chief. These are deep things I want you to think about, because next week we're going to talk about politics in a very deep way. All right, guys. So, finishing everything up, some problems with consequentialism. Okay. So consequentialism might be thought of as teleological ethics. What do I mean by teleological? The end justifies the means. Right? Your actions are not the end in themselves. They're not the goal. The actions just have instrumental value. They're good instruments or machines or whatever, tools for getting you the real goal, which is maximizing happiness. You see that? So it's the happiness or the good that has intrinsic value in itself. And the actions only have value relative to that good, instrumentally, as instruments for getting you there. You see that? Now, this raises some problems. Okay? Think about this, guys. We talk about human rights, right? And when we say someone has a human right, some of the things that come to mind are right to life, right? Now, let me give you a scenario that's going to push your intuitions about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism sounds great. Maximize happiness for everybody. Okay, let's think about that. If you are in a situation as a mayor or a sheriff or whatever, and there's a riot going on, and let's say that the riot is full of people who are angry at another group of people, right? So you have two groups of people that are angry at each other. Maybe there was a murder and there was a race-based murder or something like that. And you make a utilitarian calculation. You say, aha, I want to maximize pleasure in this scenario by minimizing pain. So the rioters are purely angry and it can turn into like a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. So you say, it doesn't really matter if I found the person who's guilty for this crime. All I have to do is just take a random person, accuse them of it, and so long as it produces the effect that maximizes pleasure and minimizes pain, from a utilitarian point of view, there's no problem. You see what I'm saying? This is an innocent person. But because the effect of your action on that innocent person maximizes pleasure in that scenario for everyone, you see how it's indifferent to this thing called human rights? You see that indifference? This is a huge, huge problem. The end justifies the means. The end justifies the means. If you take that seriously, guys, you can go to some crazy proportions. You can be committed literally to violating systematically human rights merely because there's some majority somewhere whose happiness will be maximized. Do you see that? Even in the context of a democracy, you still can't escape this problem, right? Because a democracy can theoretically have, at a quantitative level, majorities and minorities. And what if the maximization of the pleasures of the majority outweighs the miseries of the minority? A utilitarian could come to the conclusion that wiping out the minority might be the scenario that maximizes pleasure. Do you see that? All right. Another problem with consequentialism isn't with the human rights, it's with the concept of duty. Let's look at duty. One of the most common duties that we acquire is through promises. We promise to do something, and we typically, just at an everyday, ordinary level, we take that as a kind of duty. If I say, yes, I'll pick you up at 5 p.m. tomorrow to take you to go shopping, that's a promise. Now, there might be an order of rank among the promises, right? Some promises are heavier or more serious than others. So if there's ever a competition between two promises, some might win. Like, I don't know, if you either have to make another promise that conflicts with that one, but that's more important, or if an emergency comes up and a duty is assumed by that new emergency, your kid gets sick, you might have to cancel just taking someone to shop, okay? So I recognize there's an order of rank among duties. But my main point is this, guys. If a utilitarian comes to the calculation and he says, oh, okay, regardless of what duty I currently have, a new scenario has emerged in which if I breach this duty, then I have another thing I can do, another action I can perform that would maximize pleasure in a much more huge way. Do you kind of see what I'm saying? So you make, and this is important from a law perspective, because contracts are kinds of promises. You can think of a contract as a promise. Two promises made by two different people. Now, some people treat contracts as completely enforceable and should never be violated. But there are some theorists out there who are utilitarian, and they make economic arguments, and they say, wait a minute, courts shouldn't be out here trying to force and enforce contracts under all conditions. No, think about what's in the best interest of society. Many of the promises we make are made under some conditions, but things change. And then under new conditions, it's just more efficient to violate the old contract, pay the damages, and then maybe you're some sort of startup entrepreneur or whatever, you're entitled to do something else, you know what I mean? And under those new circumstances, not only would the new entrepreneur make more money, but society would benefit from some good or service. You guys kind of see where I'm coming from that? Yeah, so that's kind of another argument against consequentialism. Yeah, it's a deep, deep problem. And I remember in law school when we were studying contracts, we had a theorist. His name was Postman. He was a judge at the circuit level, federal circuit judge, and he's a very well-respected legal scholar. And he was big about the relationship between economics and law. And he came up with a theory of efficient breach of contract. That is, he said, in many cases, it is just more efficient for the economy and maximizing the good of everyone that we breach inefficient contracts, contracts that would prevent the efficient allocation of resources, right? And that's what economics is. It's about the efficient allocation of resources. So if we start honoring contracts as if they're these sacred things that should never be broken, we might be very economically inefficient. You know what I mean? All right. And then the last thing I want to share with you is the idea that justice, this idea particularly of distributed justice, how justice should be distributed, it's a big, big problem because, again, because pleasure is subjective, right? If you take a quantitative approach to pleasure and happiness, one of the implications is that if you're trying to maximize, let's say everybody here, right? You're trying to maximize pleasure for everybody here. Well, utilitarianism counts each unit per person, but it doesn't always say that the outcome needs to be redistributed fairly between all the people involved. You see what I'm saying? So let's say let's say a particular action or a particular scenario is going to lead to 5 units of pleasure for me, 10 for Nick, 12 for Sarah, 20 for Dante, and then 15 for Guillaume. Let's say that that's the case. So a utilitarian would come along, and let's assume that his numbers, his units are correct, right? So what he would do is he would say, okay, action 1 produces that distribution, action 2 produces a different one, and action 3 produces a different one for each one of us. He's going to choose the one that just maximizes the absolute number. You see what I'm saying? But the distribution in each one of us is different, it's subjective. So you can have a perverse situation where, because Guillermo gets 100 units of pleasure from that thing, and Sarah and I and Nick and you only get like 10, the right action to do, simply because of the sum, you see what I'm saying? The total sum, that's the only relevant factor. So can you see how that's unjust? We're honoring him, even though the distribution of the pleasure is not fair. Go ahead.
Is there a mean utilitarianism?
A what?
Is there like a mean utilitarianism where you just focus on mean, like success or mean employment or something?
I'm trying to think. In the literature I have, so the founders were Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Jeremy Bentham literally thought you calculate pleasure. And he needed that in order to maximize pleasure. Mill said, no, I don't think you can calculate pleasure. And the quantitative approach in general is not the right thing. Instead, what we should have is qualitative understandings of pleasure. And we should maximize, not quantitatively, but qualitatively. We should try and get everyone to feel the most refined Epicurean pleasures possible. So Mill was all about, hey, let's train people why museums are great, why eating food with a good diet is good. Those very refined pleasures, conversation, and even the pleasure in virtue, maybe, right? Or having a good work ethic. So yeah, I suspect that the mean is a bit easier to achieve with Mill's model than with Bentham's. Bentham literally just respects that absolute number, the huge sum. Any questions? All right, so here's I'm going to finish up with consequentialism now. Here's the big takeaway, guys. The big takeaway is this, and we're heading towards political philosophy next week. The big takeaway is this, guys. Look, Bentham and Mill were reformers of society. They weren't just making these models and utilitarianism for fun. They're trying to figure out how can you create better societies. And one of the principles that they wanted to maximize was liberty. Because as I said before, from their perspective, liberty is one of the things that brings the most pleasure. Just the feeling that you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. And in the history of the world, England and the United States have been the two leaders in that sense. Their understanding of the state and the role of government in the state has been from the beginning maximizing liberty. Even before we had our great Constitution, with Jefferson and founding fathers, back in the history of England, I don't know if you've heard of this, but there was also a kind of restriction on government by the nobility in England's history. It was called the Magna Carta. Have you heard of the Magna Carta before? Yeah. So that's a uniquely English sensibility. This idea that liberty is priceless. And so the earliest version we have of that is restrictions on the government by the nobility. And then later on, it becomes restrictions on the government just by the populace in general, the constitutions. We have Locke writing wonderful books about maximizing toleration, being very tolerant. And he also talks about having different branches of government to limit each other's potential for tyranny. So all I'm trying to say is Mill is operating in that environment, and he's saying, look, liberty is a good in itself. And so it should only be interfered with under very special conditions. And there's a whole theory we're going to talk about next week called paternalism. When someone is being paternalistic to you, what are they doing? You hear that word paternalism, what do you think? Yeah, sorry, say it. Yes, exactly. So, acting, forcing you to do things, interfering with your liberty for your own sake or for your own best interest. Now, Mill, in theory, is completely against that. He's like, no. The only time you should limit liberty is because of protection, right? So if someone is hurting another person, you can limit that person's liberty or something like that. So criminal law is generated by the kinds of activities that in theory always limit someone else's liberty, all right? So he was completely against interfering with people's liberty unless absolute necessity required. But he ran into a really big problem, theoretically, which is that the role of government, really? Or is it a kind of paternalism justified? In other words, you take a little infant. How does that thing know what's in its best interest? Even in the context of the family, there's a lot of paternalism. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot of interference in the life of the infant for its own sake. So ideally, Mill would be very conservative and very, classical liberal, hey, let's maximize liberty, and the things that happen spontaneously in markets and things like that, they're for the best of society. But he can't hold on to that because when he thinks about what's in everyone's best interest, one of the institutions he can't help but recognize is education. So compulsory education, right? Forcing people at least to study until high school. At the end of the day, he says that's a legitimate form of paternalism. That is a legitimate form of interfering with people's liberty for their own sake. I guess his idea is something like, if you educate people the right way, then down the line, they will be less likely to commit crimes. They will be less violent. So it's a kind of investment. You know what I mean? Any ideas about that, Carl? We're done pretty much with consequentialism. All right, good. So deontology, guys. Deon means Greek, ology means study of. So Kant is this philosopher who basically gives an alternative, like a secular alternative to divine command theory. Remember, divine command theory says the only way we can get right and wrong is if we have a moral law. And the only way we can have moral law is if there's a moral lawgiver. And so for deontology, that moral lawgiver in the context of divine command theory is God. But there's another type of deontology. That's one type of deontology. I guess you could call it theological deontology. Your duties come from God. Your duties come from the moral law which comes from God. Kant Immanuel Kant is saying, look, the same model, but just with one modification. Yes, Kant would agree. Your duties come from moral law, but the moral law, for Kant, he's writing the Enlightenment, right? So as an Enlightenment thinker, he values reason. He believes that reason is what gives you the moral law, not God. Reason gives you the moral law, and the moral law gives you your duties. So let's contrast deontology for a minute with consequentialism. It's very important. Deontology says it's not the consequence that matters, it's the motive or the intention behind the action. That's what matters. And on top of that, it's not just any motive, but a very special motive, the motive of duty. So both divine command theory and Kant's deontology agree that duty is the only motive that can give an action moral value. The difference between them is that divine command theory is popular with religious people because they say the moral law can only come from a moral lawgiver, and that must be God, something metaphysical. Whereas for Kant, it comes from our own reason. So somehow our reason can figure out a way to generate the moral law, and then all that's left for us to do is to obey or submit. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so how does that work? Well, the bottom line, guys, is reason is all about consistency. So reason doesn't tell you one particular law to follow. Rather, it just demands that you follow law in general. But law in general is self-consistent. It doesn't contradict itself. And Kant's understanding is basically this. When the moral law commands you to do something and it's rational, what it's doing is that it is basically saying, look, do only those things that you can consistently will that everyone do. And that's that. To be rational about things is not to have irrational favoritisms, partiality. You guys know what I'm saying? So apply the law consistently. Don't make exceptions for yourself or anyone else. And that really is his law. He says, act only on that maxim that you can will to be a universal law. So whatever you do, the test for whether or not it's going to pass the deontological test is to test whether what you're doing is the kind of thing that would either create contradictions with itself, that is, if everyone did this, it would stop getting done. Or, two, you wouldn't want this to be done to you. It's just classic biblical reasoning, right? You want the others as you would have them do unto you. And then the other version of the categorical imperative basically says, act only on that maxim that will treat other people as ends and not as mere means. What does it mean to treat another person as an end and not as a means? It goes back to that instrumental versus intrinsic value I was telling you about. If you truly respect human beings and you think they have dignity, then you will not abuse them. You will not treat them instrumentally. You see that? If you're using someone to get what you want or to gratify your desires, you're demeaning them, you're dehumanizing them. And that's his point. So he says, look, it's okay. In society, we have to cooperate. We need each other. So it's okay to use someone as a means. Just don't use them as a mere means. You know what I mean? In other words, you can have employees, but treat them well, treat them with dignity. In addition to them being instruments to your goals or your profits or whatever, treat them with respect, treat them with dignity. And that's the basic point. And obviously, there are some institutions that this automatically disqualifies. Slavery would be out for Kant, despite his opinion about the Negroes. He still did not want them to be treated like slaves. And on top of that, I think institutions like prostitution, those would go. In fact, I think he's very suspicious of like sex in general. Because he thinks, for the most part, unless you're reproducing and having children, what you're doing is you're objectifying the other person. You see why you think that? You're really just using them to gratify your desires. Okay, so that's deontology, guys. That's the main That's the main idea really behind it. And when we look at its limitations, we come just basically to the fact that, for one thing, how do you guys feel about someone who literally only values their duty? So in any context, they're calculating what their duty is, and then almost like an automaton, like a robot, they perform that duty. And the only motive that they act from is the duty. I hope you see where I'm going with this. Things like compassion and empathy, these are softer, more tender, more gentle aspects of humanity. But Kant would completely disregard those. You see what I'm saying? If you visit your friend in the hospital, from Kant's point of view, you should only do that if you have theoretically determined that this person who you've known for 30 years, it's your duty to go and see them. See how that's kind of like dehumanizing both of you and him? You show up at his bedside and you're like, and he's, oh man, I'm so glad to see you tonight. Well, I calculated that was my duty to be here. It's like, man, quit playing. I've been reading Wikipedia all day. And then you repeat it. You're like, no, I literally determined like a robot that this was the location I should be in for the next 9 hours because I derived what my duty was. Then I think your friend might get horrified. Like, is this a robot and he's treating me like a robot? There's something dehumanizing. Again, this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Sweetness and kind of humanizing people might be, in the long run, much more important than having a very strict, consistent, conformist attitude, self-righteous. You know what I mean? There's something dehumanizing about being too righteous. And I know it sounds crazy, right? But you kind of see where I'm coming from with that? That's one of the big criticisms of Kant and Deontology. Really? No compassion, no joy at seeing your friend, not going to see him because you just missed him so much. You really have to calculate a duty and then act like a robot in the performance of that duty. The other big objection against deontology is the idea that something like lying would be categorically, unconditionally out of something. Just never, ever. So even if your lie had instrumental value in producing a great result, he's not a teleological person. He's not a consequentialist. So he doesn't care about its instrumental value. And once again, we face a kind of either dehumanization. You see what I'm saying, right? A Nazi knocks on your door. It says, where is Mr. Rosenfeld? And you say, well, he's here, but we can't see him. Wasn't there another option when you knocked at the door? You could have said, I don't know where Mr. Rosenfeld is. Even though it's in your basement. But because you're this robot, you guys see what I'm saying? You can save your Jewish neighbor's life, but because you're following Kantian ethical logic, you can't lie. So now it's either a confrontation with the SS and the Gestapo, or what? For what? Wasn't it more instrumentally valuable just to lie? What do you guys think? I find it dehumanizing, honestly. Go ahead.
I also think there's instances where lying doesn't really have a positive or negative result. Like, you know, one of your friends in the dressing room and she asks you, do I look good in this dress? Let's say she doesn't look bad, she doesn't look great, but you want to make her feel good, so you say she looks good, and in the end, it really doesn't matter. She's going to buy the dress and wear it once. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't change anybody's life. Like,
exactly. That's a very, what you just expressed was humanity. So it's the person with feelings. And a white lie is not going to do nothing. It's going to make her feel great. Maybe she has a date later on. Maybe she's going to the prom. You're not going to devastate this girl's, you're not going to devastate her night, either by insulting her or by that awkward silence.
yeah.
Awkward, dutiful silence. A dutiful, awkward silence. You guys see what I'm talking about? Okay, virtue ethics, guys, is the ancient one. We have consequentialism from the early 1800s. We have deontology from the late 1700s. Aristotle is the earliest, from the like 300s before Christ. Give me 3 different virtues and 3 different vices. That's how we'll discuss this.
Patience.
Patience, kindness, whatever you want, guys. Caring, yeah. Guys, that's it. That's all you need to know. This is not rocket science. Aristotle is saying what it is to be a person involves this aspect of humanity called having a character. And a character is just a bundle or a set of character traits. These character traits can either be excellent or they can be vicious. The excellent ones are virtues, the vicious ones are vices. They're flaws. And we're a bundle of them, we're a collection of them. And this is what it is to be human. And Aristotle cares so much about maximizing virtue. But this time, not just in the fitness sense, but in the moral sense. Courage is a very moral thing. Temperance, wisdom, like she said, patience. And if you're a Christian, faith, love, hope, all of those are virtues, right? So there's this aspect of being human that's remote from all the pleasure you can get and all the pain. It's remote from identifying where your duty is. It's just simply capacities that you have to do good to yourself and others. And it's wonderful. We're so rich. There's so much we have to offer as human beings here. And I think this is an amazing, amazing study of what it is to be human. And I think that what Aristotle is basically saying is that habits are how we build character. Habits. That's his real idea. Like, see, knowledge is a virtue, just like understanding and wisdom. But those are the kinds of things that we could just get in a lecture. But for him, to really become courageous, you got to confront life. You got to get out there and get scared a little bit and then overcome the fear. And that's how you eventually build courage. Self-control, same thing. Moderation, same thing. Those are the kinds of things that you have to be out there at the battlefield of life. You can't just listen to lectures about them, right? And then to complete the picture of virtue ethics for Aristotle, the only other thing we need to really point out is his idea of balance. So balance here means this, guys. True virtue, and this is a cultural thing. So the ancient Greeks loved harmony, proportion in all things. They have a great saying, nothing in excess. Don't do anything in excess. Well, that includes virtue itself. And that's what makes it beautiful. It's humanizing. You can be too liberal. You can be too generous. You know what I mean? Like, there are extremes. And it's all about finding the right balance. So something like courage, for Aristotle, is a center between recklessness. A reckless person doesn't even see the danger. You know what I mean? They don't even register the danger. So that's not true courage. That's not something like recklessness. On the other hand, on the other side of courage, of course, is cowardice, right? They're afraid of every little thing. So courage is this middle point. And that's true of almost all the virtues for Aristotle. And I'll leave you with the last virtue. He called magnanimity the crown of the virtues. That if someone really develops the ethical life to its highest potential, they will achieve something called magnanimity. Magnanimity. Magna is Latin for great, and then anima is soul, so greatness of soul. In Greek, it would be megalopsychia. Megalopsychia. What is greatness of soul, guys? It calls it the crown of the virtues. If you become completely virtuous, what will happen is that you will change in the kinds of things that you find honorable. You will no longer honor power, wealth, fame, those kind of things. You will no longer honor anything instrumental. The only thing you will honor is honors themselves, and even the honors that you're offered in society will be very picky, because a lot of them are petty. And for Aristotle, at the end of the day, the most magnanimous person will just honor beautiful but useless things, kind of like philosophy, something that doesn't have instrumental value. And his hero here is Socrates, because Socrates taught Plato and Plato taught Aristotle. So Aristotle here has in mind someone like Socrates, who again neglects power, fame, money, is not interested in those things, is just interested in things of the mind for their own sake. And it's in that context that I'm going to conclude the virtue ethics. Why? Because Socrates is the first philosopher who explicitly identified virtue with knowledge and virtue and knowledge with happiness. So, in order to truly be happy, you've got to be virtuous, and you've got to have knowledge. He thought by identifying virtue and knowledge, what he was really implying is this: every person who does vice, who does bad, only does it because they're ignorant. If they knew what their actions really would produce, all the evil, they would not do it. So for him, a world full of evil people is nothing but a world full of ignorant people. You see that? And for him, knowledge is the prize, not just for contemplation, but because it will cure us of our ills. When you really enlighten people and let them know what's in their best interest, there will be no more vice. There will only be virtue, because they'll see that this is in my best interest. If you not, if you equate vice, if you equate virtue and knowledge, then all you've got to do is get rid of ignorance, and you'll have a virtuous society. And you'll convince everyone that, hey, it's in your own best interest to be virtuous. All right, guys, we're done. Next week is